Extra Innings here on 88.3 FM The Sting. It's Andrew Hoty joining you here at about the top of the midnight hour. And we have a special guest on the show. He's been on our show before a few times, but we'd like to welcome him back to Extra Innings, John Basalla. You can also hear him Sunday nights from 6 to 8 on Golden Age of Rock and Roll. He's been on a lot of other great shows here on The Sting over the years as well. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you on the show as always. I just want to briefly talk a little bit about this recent event you were at representing WBWC, 3,500 watts, and that was at the Grog Shop in Cleveland Heights, I believe.
3,500 watts is the name of a movie about the history of college radio, and particularly music related, and its impact on the music industry during primarily, I guess, the 70s, 80s, and into the 1990s. That's what the movie covered, heavily covered, as they shared and showed how airplay on college radio stations made a difference in a number of bands' careers. And they had members of those bands, some of those bands, in the movie talking about how important it was for their career that college radio embraced them. For example, Akron, Ohio's own Devo, who had a big hit with a song called Whip It in the early 1980s. Mark Mothersbaugh of the band, maybe even one other person from the band, were interviewed. Also interviewed were members of the band Let's Active. Even a member of the big band REM popped up in the show. And Pixies. The Pixies, that was another one.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, there was a panel at this event. I believe you spoke on the panel, if I am not mistaken. Can you talk a little bit about the panel, what happened, the event itself, what you went over?
After the movie was over, they had a panel. One person from each of the university radio stations were up there, and I was representing WBWC, and everyone got to share a little about their radio station, and after which, and the moderator had some pretty deep and incisive questions to ask, which everybody answered. Then there was a question and answer period, and that's the short version of what it was. We learned a lot. We learned, like from Bill Peters of WJCU, that he recalls that college radio was important in the history of the band Metallica. Metallica got their start in college radio. I didn't know that. I perceived it was a hard rock metal thing and more of the so-called progressive rock stations, but that's what he said, and he had to know because he's been doing a metal show for decades. And also learned things about other stations that were there. There was a total of 4 of us. For our situation, I spoke about our Broadcast Majors program, gave them the history of it, and shared with them some WBWC personnel who have gone on to broadcast and broadcast-related careers. And that was a really good thing to do, because that is a focus. Other thing that happened, they talked about the future of college radio, and I said, when they came to me, I said, well, one thing is this: don't do anything that your owners don't like. That will help you survive, so to speak. Don't do anything your owners don't like. And then I also went on to give examples of different things that have happened at WBWC over the decades. Most notably, as I think I mentioned already, about our format and how it has been positively impactful for students, because the format is at the base of the pre-professional program that we try to do here to lift people up, to get them ready for maybe better internships and entry-level positions as we do our thing under the Broadcast Majors program. Our director of broadcasting, Professor Joseph Tarantowski, was there, and he was in the audience, and he shared from the audience some thoughts about collaboration and some other things. And the most fun for me was talking about, once again, relationship between the owner and the students at the station, if the students are running the station. And I said, well, we moved from one location on campus to a new location a couple of years ago. Now, usually in the corporate world, when you move, things get smaller. That's just the normal way of things. All of a sudden, you shrink a little bit. Part of it is because of technology, it gets smaller and you don't need as much space. But I mentioned that for us, we had a large music library. When we moved from our previous location to this location we're in now, our music library actually got bigger. And I got a big round of applause from the audience on that one. They liked hearing that.
That's awesome. The music library here, of course, is massive. Great selection of stuff. And, beyond just the format, we have great stuff in there, too.
Right.
But, the format has been our base here. But on shows like Extra Innings now, we have a classic rock theme.
Yep. And what I was trying to get across is we provide an alternative listening experience and good learning, experiential learning for students. We do them both. Now, the one thing in the movie that they didn't cover, which I thought was too bad. They didn't cover stations that have a focus on students getting into the business, either directly or indirectly, or either at radio and television stations or at broadcast-related stations. They didn't cover that at all, which I thought was actually a piece that was missed in this movie. But it was a very interesting and good movie. And I have also mentioned that we have some people who are and have been in television. And we have one of our news directors from a few years ago who she's now at the 6 and 11 o'clock, one of the news anchors at a TV station out there. And so that was fun to mention.
Yeah, the great alumni that have come here and have been able to go do great things outside of here too. A lot of people that are alumni, though, they've stayed in. I mean, you talk about myself, you talk about yourself, Tom Lamoureux doing a great job in between our lineup here on Sunday nights. Dennis King, Ryan Radke, just to name a few. More on this event. I know you talked about the panel, a lot about what people are doing now. What are your thoughts on how far the Sting has come, not only in the last 65 years, 66 now we're going on, but the history of the station that you're able to talk about with the panel, and what college radio may mean to not just the panel itself and the audience, but to you personally and to the demographic that has developed here on campus?
Well, one thing that was interesting, I know that we've noticed that the listenership to the station is a bit on the older side, older than, or a lot of the listeners older than the students here. One of the other stations, Cleveland State Station, mentioned that too, that they noticed that their listenership is older than the student body. And that was an interesting thing, and that's fine, but it's also a bit on the concerning side, because if you don't have young people listening, you might have lesser amount of young people coming to work at the radio station if they're not listening to radio to begin with. So that's an area of concern. And I mentioned, I think I mentioned how our professionally modeled format developed and why we do that. I mentioned that, and they had some fun. A lady from the audience has a fun question, asking about what kind of weird things happen or different things happen on your station. And I was able to say, well, then that's a new story. It's a new story that on the golden age of rock and roll, which I'm filling in on these days, I mentioned I played a Jerry Lee Lewis song, and I don't recall it. The playlist is no longer here from several weeks ago or a few weeks ago. And I got a call from one of our listeners in North Ridgeville who wanted to know, what was that song you played? And he mentioned what some of the lyrical content was. I had no idea what it was. And I said, well, I'll have to go look. And I went and looked, and I couldn't find it. The very next week, he called back and said, well, I talked to a lady at the library, and she couldn't find it, and she wants to know, too. And I think, oh, boy, I got to try to find out what the heck I played, because I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's just the nature of a lot of times what we play here on the show. We played a lot of stuff you don't typically hear on stations anymore, like in your show, Golden Age of Rock and Roll. You hear a lot of music that you probably will not hear on commercial radio or anything like that.
You definitely won't anymore.
But you could hear it here on the Sting, which is really interesting.
That's the value. You have big hits and some rarities. I get to play some rarities because we take care of our turntables and our needles and stuff like that, so I don't fear playing some of my super rare records up here, of which I've got some from the 50s and early 60s, so that works out well.
Absolutely. John, I appreciate you taking the time this evening to come out here and talk a little bit about what happened at this event, and I'm glad everything went well with the panel and the audience. It sounded like it was been a great time.
It was fun.
And 3,500 watts
is the
was
movie,
the name of it. The
and,
movie
and I guess it'll be available for streaming. Maybe it is now. I guess it'll be on DVD at some point. It's worth watching. It's worth watching. And just realize that not everything is covered. As I mentioned, they didn't cover those stations that have a focus on student learning in relation to getting careers and jobs and internships in the business. They didn't cover that. I wish they would have, but maybe then again, the movie was about an hour and 10 minutes long, so you can't cover everything.
Absolutely. And John, appreciate your time this evening. Hope you have a good rest of your night, and thank you so much for joining Extra Innings.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.